really excited? Yeah? I'm not feeling it. Are you excited? Okay, so I am super thrilled because I've been following this guy on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, pretty much anywhere a social profile exists for a couple years now. I've watched him grow through his podcasts. I've watched him start really streaming some awesome content with video. And I finally got to meet him at Social Media Marketing World in 2017, where he was a phenomenal guest speaker. Okay, we're talking like top names in social media marketing, influencers. I don't even know how he agreed to this. I'm just that excited. So we're super lucky. He has been to over 70 countries. He worked for the Department of Defense as head of cybersecurity. He now runs 2 podcasts every week. I want you to follow him absolutely everywhere because he's going to absolutely blow your mind. I'm thrilled to introduce Brian Fanzo, who is here to talk about digital storytelling and how to be a millennial and work with other people. All right. Thank you.
And you have to thank Nicole. So it was Nicole's work. She knew I was coming last night to speak at Social Media Dallas, and she reached out almost 10 days ago and said, "You up for making something happen with a quick turnaround?" And usually, especially with a big brand, I'm like, yes, and that has 0 chance of happening. But when you have an advocate that kind of goes to bat for you and makes things happen, we were able to. This is session number 4. So I did 2 with leadership this morning. I just did one at 1 o'clock with a whole room. And so I call myself a change evangelist. I have a unique background, kind of what she had said. I worked in cybersecurity for the Department of Defense, computer science major, focused on web design. I went to Radford University in Virginia. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, and I didn't mean to have that up there because it usually means when I'm in enemy territory that I automatically now have to go a little higher because you're already like, oh, damn Pittsburgh person, I understand where I'm at. I will say my brother lives in Deep Ellum, so I'm sleeping there, and so I have a little bit of local love, and those are my 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters, 7, 6, and 3 years old, and that picture there is me and actually on Saddam Hussein's throne in Iraq. I did 3 trips to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan as a government contractor, and my goal at Cyber was to help the different branches of the military collaborate in the cybersecurity arena. So if you think it's hard for your team to work together and make things happen, my job was getting the Army to share policies with the Navy. So I will challenge you that my role in collaboration was extremely difficult, and it taught me lots of things. I worked there for 9 years. I left there and actually went to work for a cloud data center company that was moving into the cloud, and I got kind of my dream job. My dream job was I looked up to Guy Kawasaki, who was the evangelist for Apple, and Robert Scoble, who was the evangelist for Microsoft, and I got to create that dream job at a data center company. We had 256 employees. In 2 years, we had 614 employees. So we were hiring about 12 new hires a week. I was in charge of new hires and kind of connecting the dots. And I kind of found my love for what I like to call translating the geek speak. And so my job is really, what I do now. I've been an entrepreneur for 4 years, owning my own business, is I try to work with brands on how they can tell their story, reach unique audiences, and ultimately kind of bring this entire story together. And so my first book comes out this fall, and the topic that I spoke about this morning with leadership is what I call a millennial mindset. And so I am 35, I'm barely a millennial, and I say I'm a pager-wearing millennial, and the reason I say I'm a pager-wearing millennial is that when we picture a millennial, we always picture someone that was born on Facebook, that had an iPhone in high school, and that is in a kind of a different arena. And I graduated college, I gave up my EDU address, and when Facebook came out, I couldn't sign up. So I'm a millennial that had to actually wait till they allowed everybody with normal email addresses to sign up. I didn't have a phone until I was a senior in college. So the idea of a millennial for a lot of people is not me. It's a different version of the millennial spectrum. And so I'm going to talk a lot about that because in the book and the whole concept is, in the last chapter of the book, we go through a test of different things that say, what you like. Hey, do you want to get your voice heard? Do you enjoy being acknowledged? Do you want to be a part of something that's making a difference? And majority of us are going to say yes. And you actually get a millennial card in the sense where I think a lot of the characteristics that we look at for this generation that we all generations want. And I was very blessed. I had a team of 32 employees that worked for me at the Department of Defense, my direct reports. And my first 30 employees were older than I was. So at 24 years old, I was managing a team of 18. By the time I was 28, managing a team of 30, and I was the youngest still on the team. And so I grew a great appreciation for who cares about their age, who cares about, I want to work with people that ultimately come together and do some great things. And it's allowed me to work in different organizations and different groups. So IBM, SAP, Dell, those are my current clients that I do a lot of storytelling work with and help them bring in influencers and kind of connect the dots, as well as how they can empower their current teams to work together. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that entire concept. But kind of the first thing is the setup is that, times have definitely changed. And it's a very interesting world that we live in today. And I have a podcast called SMAC Talk. And it stands for Social, Mobile, Analytics, and Cloud. And it's a very geeky podcast. I've had it for about 4 years now. And myself and my co-host Daniel, we really focus on covering everything from artificial intelligence to cognitive computing to the Instagram updates, or to understand how we look at analytics and what Watson technology is. And so much of that is really interesting because it relates to all of us every single day. If you think about it, prior to 9 years ago, when you bought a new piece of technology, it was a very exciting experience. And then the iPhone came out and kind of transformed a lot of what we look at. And so mobility is one that we're going to focus a lot on in this conversation. But the idea is I'm going to talk you through kind of what has changed as a consumer, but also what has changed for us as a workforce and how we can work together. And that change is really driven by these four things: social, mobile, analytics, and cloud. And so at the end of this presentation, I will definitely leave room for questions. It took a little while to get the last group to ask one question, and then we had an onslaught of questions throughout the entire time. But feel free to throw a hand up if there is something I say or something you want me to elaborate on. We have a smaller group, so I'm open to kind of dancing and kind of bobbing as we kind of go through. But when we're looking at change, and you're looking at not only what has changed, but this idea of what exists today. And so this is every second on the internet. So every second, there's 154 Twitter accounts created, 79,800 tweets. Now, my tagline is I talk really fast, and I tweet even faster. I don't tweet that fast. So if you think about it, this is how much noise is created every single minute on the internet. This is pretty insane if you think about it. And the old way of doing things and really understanding the noise is that this is pretty amazing, all the things that are going on, but this also leads to more distractions, more opportunities to get content. And so we're going to highlight a couple of things that you might think about with the brands that you work with or together with the clients, because a lot of this distraction means it's harder and harder to grab attention, right? With all of these distractions, with all of the things that are happening in today's world. And it's pretty cool. If you check it out, if you just type in the browser, the internet in real time, you can actually see this updated every second. So they have this, it's a running live graphic. It's a pretty cool graphic. I try to avoid any extra technology in presentations so it doesn't update live. But in this noisy world, in this noisy environment, not only are we distracted, but we kind of look at life differently, right? When I talk about my grandfather, I was born in Pittsburgh, and my grandfather would always say, he consumed his news and got his information from his newspaper. And he had 3 channels on his TV, but he didn't have remote control, so really he had 1 because he was too lazy to go up and change the channel. And so the day and age of us consuming that way then migrated to the idea of the news and the internet. And in today's generation, my daughter got a 5-second ad on the Amazon Prime. We were switching between Peppa the Pig and Princess Sophia on Sunday, and she freaked out because there was a 5-second ad. And I'm like, kid, in my day, and I channel a little bit of my dad. And I'm like, wait a second here. And so, in this new generation, and really it's not just new generation, it's this digital world, not only do we have all of these opportunities, but I believe I'm raising my daughters in the greatest times there is, because we have all of these opportunities to tell our story. We have all of these opportunities to learn kind of as we move forward. And it's also an exciting time because for the first time in history, we have 4 generations that are active in the workplace. So 4 generations we have, from the black and white TV to the Netflix generation, that are all active today, which really gives us an opportunity to do some really cool things because a vast amount of experience, a vast amount of new energy and passion and ways to look at things. But it also poses an interesting question is, how do we relate somebody that was born into the Netflix world for someone that still looks at the iPhone as a distraction and something we wish kind of disappeared, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that because a lot of the brands that I work with, I do a lot of coaching for Millennial, Gen Z. And I believe there's power in change, but change is hard, change is scary. And if you force change, or if you tell someone that they're doing something wrong, no matter which generation they fall into, almost our immediate reaction is no, stop, we don't want to change, right? And it's mainly our mindset. I think we've looked at change incorrectly for years. Because when we look at change or change that we're making, one of the things that we often do is like, ooh, I changed because I did something wrong. Or the results of a bad decision made me change, right? Like I decided to go with, Cox Cable, and I realized they sucked, so I need to change to DirecTV. But change ultimately is not the result of bad decisions, but it's the result of all decisions that give you the opportunity to change for something new. And today, change is so rapid and so fast that if you don't embrace change, you're going to get run over. And a good example of that is, I remember my dad having the VHS recorder over his shoulder, and for those that are too young, before you could video on your phone, there was these video cameras that your parents had to buy. And they had these giant tapes that went into the VCR, but that technology was actually king for about 25 years. The Blu-ray DVD came out and was only king for 4 years. If you think about in the rate of change and how quick technology is coming and going, Blockbuster DVD thought that Blockbusters was going to be around for a long time. They thought Netflix was crazy for mailing out things, and why would you get these people's data? And well, where's Blockbuster now? Extinct, right? And so when we start looking at all of this change and all of this rapid growth, I don't like to look at things in what year you were born, because it's kind of funny, right? We're measuring and talking about labeling each other on one data point, the year you were born. And none of us got to pick that data point. Like our parents decided when we were born, right? Like it's a data point that has zero to do with our own influence. So I break things down, and my first book will come out in the fall called A Millennial Mindset. And in that book, I try to break things down differently. And I refer to it as the digitally unplugged or digitally powered. Or in the book, I call it digital natives and the digital dinosaurs. And to put that so you understand the difference, if you look at change, if you look at digital collaboration, if you look at the community that you have access to today online as something that's a nuisance, something that you don't like to leverage, then you're on the unplugged side of the house, right? If you believe that today's world, we have the chance to connect with people around the globe, no matter where they're from, and we like to use our GPS or Waze technology to, as a mapping software, then you're on the powered side of the house. And my brother lives here in Deep Ellum. My mom happened to be visiting from Phoenix, and we were at lunch yesterday, and I was telling my mom about this whole presentation. And my mom was like, oh, that's interesting, like the whole difference. She's like, my friend Jean, she was driving out from California to Phoenix, and she called us when she was super lost. And my mom was like, well, what does it say on your GPS? And she's like, my GPS, on line 11 of my MapQuest printed out directions, and that's digitally unplugged, right? Like they have the technology, and they even have. I didn't really know. Honestly, I didn't know that they were still in business from a standpoint of. I didn't know that mapping was still a technology, but there's an app for that, right? Like it's almost like everything there's an app for. And if you look at what these possibilities are, then you're kind of living on this environment. And so within your teams, within your groups, and even when you're creating content, you're shaping Facebook posts and you're doing things for your clients, you have to start breaking down and understanding these two generations, not just the years people were born. Because at 35 years old, I relate oftentimes much more with a 40-year-old than I do with a 25-year-old. Like, let's just face it, in the scheme of life. And so when we look at all of these overlays in this digital world, it's definitely about rapid change, but also the impact of social media. I mean, 2.3 billion active social media accounts, 176 million were added just last year. And so although social media is still, it's kind of been around for 7 8 years, and we feel like it's kind of there. It's still growing. It's still changing. It's transforming. I mean, just today, Instagram added 2 new updates to how they track hashtags, and now when you hashtag in a story, you can search that, and you can actually now search by location. So you can type in Dallas and see every single person that's posted in Dallas. You didn't even have to hashtag it in Dallas. You could check it in Dallas, right? All of those that happened today. Like I was literally reading that in between the 4 sessions that I did today, and I had to send that to my team because I know I'm going to have a client that's going to message me and say, how are we using that next week? And say, chill out, like we just got the update, right? But this change is exciting, but it also means there's so much going on. And this is something that my dad's a candy salesman. My dad was he makes a peanut brittle company. He owned that company for a long time. He sold that to Mars Candy, and now is a candy consultant. And he's always believed in the power of a handshake. And while I was live, I was interviewing someone on Google Hangouts. He texted me and said, son, I love what you're doing. I love that you're doing all of these cool things on social media, but just remember, social media will not replace a handshake. And I read it out loud. I read the text out loud when I was on video, and I said, Dad, you're right. It will not replace a handshake. But social media done right gives you the chance to have new handshakes, have more handshakes, and then ultimately turn some of those handshakes into what I like to say hugs and selfies. And the first time I met Nicole at Social Media Marketing World, she'd been following me for 3 years. It wasn't a handshake and how are you, tell me about yourself. It was a hug and say, hey, I was following you on Snapchat. I saw you missed your plane. Did you get your bag? It's a conversation. And so I think perspective is something that I hope you get out of this presentation, because perspective is extremely important as you're trying to work with if a baby boomer is trying to work with a Gen Z or a millennial collaborate with a Gen Xer, so much of it comes down to perspective. If you go to dinner and you see 4 kids, let's say teenagers, sitting at a table and all 4 of them have their phone out, there's 2 ways to look at that. A lot of us will look at that and say, wow, those people have no social skills. They're disconnected from the world. Their noses are stuck on the phone. What are they doing? There's another group that looks at it and say, wow, they're connecting with an entire ecosystem online, telling a story and documenting their life and talking to hundreds of thousands of people, not just the 3 that are at their table, right? And that's a perspective. It's a shift in perspective because it's a different walk of life. It's a different way of doing things. I mean, my daughter looks at a magazine as a broken iPad. She hates my Apple TV because she sees the logos and she swipes and it's like, that doesn't work. And I'm like, well, you have to use this remote. And she's like, Daddy, the icons are right there on the TV. I'm like, I know. And the iPad's swipeable, but that Apple TV doesn't work that way. And that change is such a shift, right? And I think it's not about saying one is right and one is wrong. It's about understanding the perspective of each, and then how can that work for our favor, right? And so a lot of times when I work with brands on collaboration and things, you have to figure out where to start. And mobile is the great place to start. And this is my youngest daughter, the 3-year-old, and she's using her iPod Touch sitting at the restaurant. And I just taught her how to use emojis, so she iMessages me emojis when I'm on the road. But when you think about this, the average consumer under 35 checks their device 58 times a day. Now, I'm probably on the 58 times before lunch crowd, just because I live on my phone. But I would rather forget my wallet at home than my phone for the most part, because we kind of are so connected in that. But part of this world, part of that connection means, the phone and mobile as a whole has really entitled us to kind of change who we are, change what we demand, change how we do things. But it's also given us data and information that we've never seen before. So consumers as a whole are no longer dumb. I like to use the Henry Ford quote, right? Henry Ford said when he was inventing the car or launching the car, that if he would have asked the consumers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. I will challenge you that if you ask millennials what they want, they're going to tell you what they want, how they want it, where they want it. They're going to scream it from the rooftop, and they're not afraid to talk about it, right? And if Henry Ford was here today, he would have he would probably be creating a Tesla, right? In all intents and purposes, because there's so much data out there. You think about it when you go to a Best Buy and you go in there to talk to the person that's working there. Oftentimes, you've done more research on the product and know more than they do that are sitting inside the store. And that's never before been the case, right? You called in or you went to somewhere because they were the expert. But today, thanks to mobile, thanks to a lot of the real-time analytics, thanks to reviews online, we now have access to information like we've never seen before. And so that makes us need to change how we do things. And that includes change even how we think of different cultures. And one of those things that change is really around video. And the reason I think video is extremely important is that we've been looking at digital. The reason we created websites, the reason we use tools online is we wanted to get further and further away from the people that we were working with. Let's face it. We didn't, if we wanted to build a website and a funnel and a lead generation campaign, the reason is when we call them, we want a higher percentage of them actually closing. So we want to actually talk to less people and kind of increase our productivity. But the further we got away from being digital, it became harder and harder to gain trust. And video is a powerful platform. I'm a big advocate for live video. So I do a lot of stuff around Facebook Live and Periscope. I've done a little over 1,800 live streams myself individually in a little over 2.5 years. And a lot of that's because I want to talk with my community, not talk at my community. And video, the reason Mark Zuckerberg is all in with Facebook Live, the reason they're so is because it's the most real aspect of online that we can get without being a handshake, without being in person. But because it's so real, because it's so raw, it's also scary. One of the things I love about live video is it amplifies the amazing things going on, but it also amplifies the bad things that are going on. And one of the slides I have for that presentation is if you suck offline, you're going to suck a lot on live stream, right? And I work with brands, and it's like, how do we tell our story, and how do we connect? And video, the reason video is taking off, and the reason video is important in this discussion, is that no matter how we're connecting with people, no matter how we're even talking with our team, we have to start thinking about, hey, how do we make this not only the most authentic and real, but how do we communicate how works best for us, right? And so one of the things that people always ask is like, how do I stand out from the noise? Because with all of this noise, I showed you that screen, there's an element of not only noise, but it's, how do I capture, and I call this attention hacking. And attention hacking really just means, how do I grab someone's attention for them to care, and then want them to come back over and over again? And it's the same thing when you're working with people and you're connecting with your teammates. There's an element of like, how do I stand out so they know that I'm a trusted resource? Because the old way, and I remember one of the executives, the first time I got promoted to a manager, he had told me, Brian, you're really good with SharePoint, which being really good with SharePoint doesn't get you very far, because SharePoint's a very interesting solution. He works for Microsoft, so that's a good thing. And he was telling me, he's like, whatever you do, don't tell anybody what you do. Don't tell them how you do it, because if you hold on to that information, you're irreplaceable. You'll never lose your job. You'll always be employed. Well, that's the old way of thinking. Today's generation looks at it and says, you are a thought leader based on what you're willing to share. As soon as you learn something, you create a how-to video and you post it on YouTube. As soon as you understand a new piece, you're putting it on a Facebook group, or you're working in this new environment. So the idea of, we used to create silos, we now look at sharing and collaborating. And so my book and the foundation of what I talked about this morning with leadership was really about the 3 C's: change, collaboration, and community. And how do you empower that? How do you connect on that? And so when you're looking at standing out from the noise, there's only one way to guarantee that you will be what no one else can be, and that's being yourself. And that's I created an online course called Be Yourself, and a lot of what I talk about is how do you be yourself online? How do you be yourself at work? It's a very refreshing. I work with a lot of enterprise companies, and a majority of my audience is older white males in blue suit jackets with a tie, because a lot of them are forced dress code. A lot of those industries are disconnected from the real world and life, and even bringing the right people into the groups. And I think it's refreshing here to go into a cafeteria and see everybody being able to express themselves via what clothing they want to wear and how they want to work, and having people from all different walks of life and backgrounds. And that's not something that every company has. That it's not something that, there's a lot of cultures that are broken within organizations because they've been siloed, because they've been blanketed and kind of focusing on, a one type walk of life. And it's because they've also had this polarized view of perfection. And so this is one slide that I really think is probably one of the most important aspects of this conversation, is that, does anybody here, just shout out the brand, and it's not the one you work for, can you think of a brand that's perfect? What about a person that's perfect? But I guarantee we're trying to create perfect content, and we want to do perfect work, and we're putting perfect expectations on a lot of the things that we're working on. And it's kind of a false sense, right? If we don't believe that anyone's perfect, if we know that the content's not perfect, why are we creating perfection as our one way of creating things? And I will tell you, a lot of the reason that people don't go on video, and live video more so, is because they want to be perfect. And if your goal is being perfect, you will never press the button. Never, because it'll never be a perfect moment. My hair's not right, the lighting's not right. What if I create this video and it goes viral, and then I'm on there for an hour and a half and I miss my conference call. Like, I'm not gonna go live now, right? That's kind of how we think. We think about this perfection element, and it's the same within our team, within our organization. And the second one is control as an illusion, right? Controlling our message, controlling our team, controlling how people do things. Control just doesn't exist. Control is something that we've always tried to do by mandating policies and procedures. And when I work with brands on how we kind of infuse the culture to get people to collaborate, I throw out rules and procedures, and I implement swim lanes. And what a swim lane is much different than a rule or procedure, is a swim lane allows people to have that gray area. It allows things to flex and change as we're moving forward. And so when you're looking at your team and you're trying to get things to work towards a goal, are you constraining it to where you prevent people from doing and working how they do best? Or are you giving them swim lanes so that everyone's unique and we can all push the different envelopes as we go? And I think control, if we're trying to control our team, if we're trying to control how we're working on things, it does make things extremely difficult. The other aspect of that is it comes around this idea of what you do. And it's funny because I'm sure a lot of you create content. We also know that you have, we're talking about the brands. We're helping brands tell their stories. And one of the things I always hear from people is like, okay, Brian, I'm going to be myself. I understand it's noisy. What the hell do I talk about on video? Or what type of content should I create? And the problem is we always focus on what we do, what products we serve, what the things are that they can buy. And the sad truth is what is very boring. No one cares what you do. The reason that the iPhone is not in the Apple commercial, it's just the pictures, is because we care about buying the new iPhone because we want to be able to use that new technology to get a new experience. I was taking pictures of my daughter turned 6 on Monday, and at her birthday party, I was using the new portrait functionality that's existed in the iPhone 7, and it's amazing. The couple pictures I got of my daughter, and I was blown away, and for me, that's why I bought the phone. I didn't buy the phone to get another iPhone. I have lots of those. I've had one every time. And so when we create content, unfortunately, we often focus on what we do. These are the services, these are the products, but we forget that people don't care about what they do. We care about how and why you do it. It's why, the reason a brand is great is because they have great people, not great products. Great products come and go. And so when you're looking at this and you're trying to figure out, see, that's I was supposed to take my Adderall. See, that's my alarm right there for me. So, I'm very transparent. So I was diagnosed ADHD at 31. I'm a big proponent of self-awareness as well as that community. So that's very funny that went off. So when you're thinking about your how and your why, the content around how and why is how you relate with people, right? We don't remember a brand for what they do. We remember them because of how they made us feel. We think about the brands that, hey, I want to work with a brand that has a why. Hey, we're doing these things to do bigger and better stuff. I mean, one of the chapters in my book is that I believe the future of marketing is actually social good. Because people, especially all of us today, we want to work and spend our hard-earned money with companies that are doing things better for the masses. I buy my daughter's Tom's shoes because Tom's shoes invests part of their money in giving back to charity. If you buy a Tom's book bag, which is what I have, they actually give a birthing kit to someone in Africa that cannot afford that and are in dire needs. And for me, spending a couple extra dollars on a pair of shoes for a company that has a social good element is where I will gladly spend my money compared to one that I'm not sure what they're doing or what their why is or how they're doing things. And it's also the reason why small businesses and entrepreneurs are really blowing up right now, especially in the small business space, because the distance between the why and the how in a small business is short. When you get to these enterprise companies, the executive, the CEO, the founder, when's the last time they actually used their product or talked to the actual customer, right? And it's harder to relate at that larger scale. The interesting thing is employee advocacy kind of fits that, and that's where a lot of the brands that I work with. But there's a problem in this whole arena is that, and I'm sure you guys are hearing it more so than a lot of people that are out there, is that hey, I'm using, the phone book, or I'm using Yellow Pages, or I'm using, traditional media or email newsletters. I don't need no face space. Like, I don't need to be on the Twitters. That stuff isn't what I need. And the interesting part was, for years, it was cool if you weren't there because your mind was like, okay, if I'm not there, they're going to email me. If I'm not there, they're going to find a way to contact me. Today, especially today's younger generation, from a consumer perspective, if you're not there, you don't care. And I will argue there is not one brand out there that wants their customers to think that they don't care. So when you have someone that's talking to you and they're saying, I don't want to be on Facebook, and I don't believe you that I need a Facebook page, or why am I getting on Twitter? Ask them that question. Do you want your consumers that primarily engage on that platform to think you don't care? It's a very interesting answers you'll get, because it's an interesting perspective, right? Because this idea of I don't want to be where my audience is the old way of thinking. Because when we walk through this and we kind of go through what I call my think like a fan philosophy, is that we struggle oftentimes on how do we relate with people, and then ask that question of how do we stand out. And think like a fan is simply this: put yourself in the shoes of the users or your clients. And when I talked to social media managers, I was speaking yesterday at the Social Media Dallas event, I asked every one of those ones that are out there, I was like, do you follow the brands that you work for on social media? And a couple of them were like, no, I don't like 5 posts a day. I don't care about that content. But yet you expect your customers to engage. And you can't figure out why no one engages in the content when you, the strategist, don't even follow your own brand. Right? This is a very interesting perspective. So when you put yourself in the fans' shoes, you start creating content that they actually want to consume. I mean, I think you can look at lots of great brands, but the UFC is one of the best that does that in all of social media, because the UFC already has rabid fans, but they realize that their fans like interacting with the ring girls. So they do a ring girls Facebook Live before every single fight. They also thought it was really cool to see what happens in the back room before and after a fight. So they do Snapchat stories from in these rooms where you could never go as a traditional fan. And so this word access is a powerful mechanism, right? So if you're creating content, how do you give people access into something they can't get anywhere else? It's a really interesting conversation. And part of that access comes with brands of all shapes and sizes. And so this is me taking some pictures and selfies and work that I've done where I live streamed at the Super Bowl for 20 hours. And I worked with brands, not very small brands, IBM, SAP, Capgemini, Deloitte, and Intelligence. We teamed up with them and we did 20 hours of live streaming at the Super Bowl, at Super Bowl 50, with the idea of creating content and conversation that gave them access to stuff they couldn't get, right? So if you were at home, how could I give you access to On the Field, which is what you see here for the Steelers, or interviewing executives? This is me at the SAP conference, and we had a sit-down table live streaming from our phone, taking over the SAP Facebook account, and interviewing different executives, bringing that perspective to that audience. And I think this idea of access is just kind of a different way of bringing the conversation to a group that we normally wouldn't. And I think this also comes down to something that I call, the field of dreams marketing is broken. And if you guys know the movie Field of Dreams, the tagline on it, that is simply, if you build it, they will come. If you build a website today, if you build a Facebook today, they're not coming. I don't care how good your page looks. The idea today says you need to go to where your audience is, and you need to go and have the conversation with them and provide value to where they then come to you, right? I still believe in the power of a website. I still believe in the importance of owned media, but there is an aspect now of if you build it that there's no guarantee they will come. And it's because we all have the ability to consume stuff wherever we want it, however we want it, wherever we want it. I mean, let's face it, we're living in this world where, does anybody want to go back to the world where where the TV channels decide when we watch our TV and when the commercials are? I mean, I remember in high school, my parents incentivized me to be a good student. Every Wednesday, if I was good, I got to stay up till 9 o'clock so I can watch 90210. Right? And that was my incentive. I got incentivized to that. And I can tell you, I was a much better student during the regular season of that show because I wanted to watch 90210 on Wednesday nights. And that idea before of, we allowed someone else to decide when we watched something, we allowed them to decide how we watched it. I mean, we would run home to watch a TV show that was going on because we knew it was our only time of watching it. Today, it's almost laughable because I'm like, well, I'll just wait till the next day, it'll be on Hulu. Or, I'm just gonna now we don't even wanna wait to the next day, we want the whole season. Like, we've got so on demand now where, hey, stop making me wait every week. Like, that's too much anticipation. Like, I want to consume it. It is weird, right? It's a completely different environment. And so the idea now is, how do you give people content and conversation at the right time? And the right time is really determined by us and the audience that's out there. I'm going to skip over that one real quick. But part of this also comes down to this stat that I talked about before, and it's 81% of the internet traffic by 2020 will be video. The interesting thing is, it does not say good video. It just says video. There was a ton of bad video that exists today. But the reason that video and the reason that we have to think about that is, how do we connect with people? How do we connect with people that we work with? You know, I love kind of raising my daughters in this day and age, because growing up in Pittsburgh, my exposure to the world or culture was really limited to a vacation to Ocean City or a vacation to Virginia Beach. And I grew up in Pittsburgh, and the people I knew, the businesses I knew, even the universities I knew were very kind of limited to that. And it grew over time as I was growing up and as kind of as the internet evolved. But my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter, Skypes with one of my employees' daughters that happens to be in Australia. And they talk about different things that they eat, and my daughter now knows about the food and the kangaroos in Australia and has exposure to an entire different world that I never would have even dreamed of having that access. And I believe that is a powerful medium. And I think when we're talking about collaborating together as a team, we also have to realize that part of this is that we have different experiences, we have different cultures, and how do we together share those experiences and share those different views on the world? Because I don't think anyone would want to go back in time and be limited or siloed into the way of growing up. And that's why these platforms, especially the social video and the video platforms that exist today, the reason that they are so powerful is they allow us to tell unique stories and allow you to come on the journey, right? So like I document a lot on Snapchat and Instagram, which is kind of how Nicole and I kind of first connected. And for me, there's an amazing connection for kind of going on at the journey of someone, allowing people to be a part of your life. But there's also a risk versus reward. Like I'm very transparent. I think transparency is something that is very innate, especially in the younger generation. And it's interesting enough because I mean, how many people here wanted Snapchat to exist when they were in college? I mean, there's a lot of things I did in college. I'm very glad Snapchat did not exist. It was not documented. But it's also a changing time. And I told this story this morning, and I think it's extremely important, is that, you know, I've done some work with the FBI, and I wasn't in bad shape with the FBI. I was doing work with the FBI. And the FBI had a problem in 1999, is that one of their policies was you could have never smoked marijuana to be an FBI agent. In 1999, they were struggling finding new candidates to be FBI agents. And so they changed the policy in 1999 to if you hadn't smoked marijuana in 10 years, you could be an FBI agent. Exactly 3 years later, they realized, oh, we still have a problem. We're going to change that to where you haven't smoked marijuana in 5 years, that you can't be an FBI agent. So then in 2007, they decided to change that and say, if you've never sold marijuana for profit, you can be an FBI agent. So when you're looking at the changing and evolving times, the weird part of that story is they went back to the FBI agents that were already there and said, you know, is marijuana an epidemic? And they're like, no, I smoked marijuana, but when you asked me that question, there was no documentation of me doing it, so it was easy to say no, right? So you look at the perspective now, and it's not that this generation is more open to doing that. It's not this generation is doing worse things or better things. It's just all documented everywhere we go, right? The United Airlines example that happened on the airplane is a perfect example, right? That probably has happened years upon years of really bad customer service and really bad things happening that were, you know, lost on the back page of a newspaper. And now you get a real-time post of that video to social media, and they just made $2.7 million in a lawsuit, right? Now, the crazy part of that is it spawned copycats and some of the bad side. But when you're looking at this overall perspective, the perspective from the FBI completely changed. They had to change their policies. But then they also realized that they were actually mandating a policy that they already had people that were different. It was just now we're living in a different time. The exposure, the documentation. So I really try to work with brands to understand that just because there's a keg stand picture of me in college that was on MySpace that you can find doesn't make me any worse than anyone else, because I promise you did a keg stand in college, and it just happened to have no MySpace back there for someone to take a picture of it. Or if they took a picture, it had, I actually have a camera, one of those DSLRs. Like now it's everything we do is documented, and it's definitely a different world. And I think part of that world ends up being the people, the audience, the community. We have a bigger voice than we've ever had before. And I will argue with I bet every baby boomer, every Gen Xer wishes that they had the ability to tell the world what they were doing when they were teenagers and what they were in their 20s. And they want to change the world the same way. It just happens to be that this generation today has the megaphone. The megaphone exists to tell the world everything. And oftentimes, we don't need to hear all those opinions. Like, let's face it, there's lots of things that go on there. And I stress a lot in my book, there's a difference between oversharing and transparency, right? Oversharing is sharing all you eat and when you go to the bathroom, and a lot of stuff that we just don't care about, right? Transparency also does not guarantee anything. And that's a very big mistake, because transparency actually is an authentic window into who you are. And if you are a bad person, transparency just exposes how bad you are, right? And so when you're looking at transparency, transparency has good and bad. I'm an extremely transparent person on how I've been building my brand. Has a lot to do with my success. I've cried on Snapchat whenever I lost a giant client, and it was a massive, devastating experience for me. I also cry during the show Undercover Boss. I'm not afraid to admit that. It's very emotional, and they give away those awards at the end. It's like, oh. But I also talk about my struggle and battle with ADHD, and the fact being diagnosed at 31 years old changed my life because I was able to identify my superpowers. And I was recently the Grand Marshal of the LGBT parade in January, and I documented that entire journey throughout what I was working on. And for me, I've lost business. I actually lost clients because of the tattoos that I have, and they're my names of my daughters. And they were someone that just didn't appreciate that and thought that was something that was not something that they were okay with, and they are no longer my client. And I can tell you, I'm not in the place where losing clients is a good thing. But I also believe in working with people and collaborating with people that are making us better, right? And ideally, they were probably not the best client for me at the end of the day, but it's also the same with our team. And one of the things that's the hardest thing for me to talk about with leadership is this idea that sometimes you have to hire and fire for culture fit. You have to move people off of a team and change teams to make things work. Because although there's these technologies, although we all have the ability to participate, that doesn't mean that we all have a shared mission. We all have the common values and practices. And it's hard sometimes to kind of face the reality that maybe we are not best to work together. I can tell you, as an entrepreneur for 4 years, I've gone into 2 business partnerships, and I've gone out of 2 business partnerships. I've quickly realized what I'm good at. I've quickly realized what I'm bad at. Apparently, one of them is picking business partners. But along that same journey, along that same ride, is the idea of how do you become self-aware? How do you move things forward? But also, how do you establish trust? And I think trust is one of the most important elements. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the slide. But trust between employees, trust between people and technology, trust between technology happening is a very interesting battle. And so these are some of the projects that I've worked on with IBM, Red Bull, Mashable. This is John Legere, the CEO of T-Mobile. He goes live every week on Periscope and Facebook Live. He does a cooking show on Sunday afternoons, his favorite cooking show. And the interesting thing for me is I've been an AT&T user for about 8 years, and I love my AT&T service. And when I was buying a second phone for my team and the things we're working on with live streaming, I went to go buy my phone, and I've had no problems with my AT&T service, but I couldn't tell you if the CEO was a male or female of AT&T, yet I've had multiple conversations with the CEO of T-Mobile. I also know how connected he is with his developers and how well in touch he is with what's going on. I can tell you I purchased a T-Mobile phone as my second device. Because that access, that trust, that for me, that authenticity between me and someone that I'm going to spend my money with was exceeding what I had with the experience of an existing client. And that trust is also an interesting one. It's this one, I was on Applebee's. We took over Applebee's.com for 12 hours. And what we did was we gave we gave 25 different influencers a $50 gift card to Applebee's. And we said, go into Applebee's and live stream your experience on your phone. We didn't tell them what to say, didn't tell them what they could buy, what they couldn't buy. And this is a highly